Welcome to, excuse me, another Facebook Live with the Train with Trust Project and Dr. Sue Dyson. I am Megan Phillips of the Train with Trust Project, here with Jody Ambrose, co-founder of Train with Trust Project. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing evidence-based information to better animal welfare. And we are joined today, as we have been throughout, by Dr. Sue Dyson, world-renowned equine orthopedist, researcher, author, and presenter. Today, we're going to turn the tables a little bit, and we're going to talk about a topic that is a little bit closer, definitely in my wheelhouse as well as Jody's. And Dr. Sue Dyson is very familiar with this concept and interested in promoting it as well. But we'll have a little bit more of a conversation about that with Dr. Sue presenting some of the questions for us a little bit. So I am going to stay here for most of the conversation, but if you want to post questions for us in the comments, we're happy to get back to you about those afterwards when we're able to, when we're done with the live. And there are also this topic of equine enrichment that we'll be discussing has come up in multiple lives before. And it's one of the reasons that we decided to discuss it today. And so I will be posting links to previous conversations that we're going to be referencing today as well in the comments. So feel free to post your comments there and we'll definitely get back to you. So I'm going to just go ahead and start sharing our presentation so you can see the images as we go along. So get that screen share going, theoretically, if Zoom decides to cooperate with us. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Let's try it again. There it is. Okay, so a jumping off point for this discussion is that the recent film that Dr. Dyson produced co-produced with Podma Video, Horses and the Science of Harmony, is a really good jumping off point for this discussion. The film does a great job of centering the horse's needs and really focusing on relationship between horse and rider. And it really starts this conversation of what are some of the things that we can do to help increase the well-being of our horse partners. So we thought that that would be a really good jumping off point for this discussion. If any of you haven't seen that, it's available for free on YouTube, the same way the 24 Behaviors of the Ridden Horse in Pain film is also available for free. So in getting going with this conversation, Dr. Sue, what is your experience with equine enrichment?
Well, I think that we have to look at it from what the natural horse's environment would be and what is missing from the environment of many horses that we have that we keep as riding horses. So do they have access to friends, freedom and forage, which are the basic requirements? And if they don't, what can we do to enable them to have a more natural environment that is better for them both physically and mentally? But I guess I'm going to throw it back to you because you two are both behavior specialists. And I think we need to learn from your perspective is what do you yourselves mean by enrichment?
Yes, and I think that's part of the goal of this conversation is to sort of go beyond what most people might recognize as enrichment for horses. People might be familiar with this picture here in the experience of giving your horse a brand new object to play with, such as a jolly ball, and not having a lot of success with that being a prolonged experience for the horse. So we want to broaden the perspective about what enrichment looks like and discuss the benefits both to the health of the horse and to horse-human relationships. So within the animal behavior field, what we generally are referring to when we talk about enrichment is creating opportunities to express natural behavior in order to promote optimal health and well-being. And my background is as a zookeeper. And so we do, this is one of the core points of our job as zookeepers is how can we create environmental complexity that will draw out natural behaviors. We want to mimic the natural setting as closely as possible, which has been a development in zoos from their inception, and has limitations, but also has a lot of potential and possibilities, and there's a lot of great success in doing that. We want to elicit natural behaviors through providing that type of environment and environmental enrichment. And one of the core things we want to do is increase behavioral diversity, see more behaviors. Um, so just going back to this slide, a couple of things that I'm calling attention to here are the sociality of animals. African wild dogs live in huge packs, and we had really huge packs at the Denver Zoo where I worked. We at one point had 21 dogs, and having that opportunity for those animals to live in that setting presented us challenges as zookeepers, but was so great for the animals. And
Can
then
I just
down,
ask a question with
yeah,
respect to that? Because horses are in their natural state, they're feral animals and they're living in herds. So if you have a horse that's at home, for example, and you've got a stable and you're keeping it at home, but you don't have other horses, can you use things like mirrors to provide enrichment so they think there might be another horse there?
I'll answer that. I think yes, you can use mirrors, you can use sounds, you can use smells. I have clients who keep their horses stabled separately in different places, and they will actually take things that smell like their familiar horse and bring it to the other stable to interact with, to get some sort of connection, some sort of sensory connection to their familiar. Um, there's there's ways like if you have horses stabled, but they can see each other and touch each other across a barrier. That's an option. Even if they aren't turned out together, there you can use sounds of other horses. You can also use other species. Socialization isn't just limited to same species animals. They interact with other animals. They interact with us, and that's social time for them as well.
yeah, definitely an enrichment we use very often in zoos is exchanging dung from different animals, and that is super enriching. We often fail to recognize how important scent is for animals.
Yeah, and if you think about if two horses rotate through the same turnout, the first thing they'll do is walk around and sniff where the others have pooped and get the information. And I think people understand that better with dogs, that dogs need to sniff and get information from those smells. The horses do as well.
Yeah. Down here on the left, we have a male lion with a lion cub, which is not always done, but is natural behavior. And given the right circumstances and being appropriately cautious, we were able to have this male lion have a very enriching experience, which is participating in the rearing of young and being present with the young cubs, and the young cubs learning from their male father how to be good dads. So this is Kamau, little male, and this is Kamau when he moved on to Minnesota Zoo. So, learning to be an appropriate parent can involve doing things that maybe seem a little scary, maybe have some risks, but with taking appropriate cautions. There's a trend in zoos with bull elephants who have typically always been separated but naturally form bachelor groups to having them live together. And I know that this is also something that comes up in the horse world with stallions.
But it
Yeah,
also relates to weaning of foals as well, because historically we've done this in a rather barbaric way. And I think now we're beginning to realize that it shouldn't be like that, and that we should not have a kind of now they're together and now they're apart. It should be a much more gradual process and ideally done within a group as well.
I was going to bring that up too. I think that it's a whole other topic. We always do this where we say, well, we'll talk about this later, but yeah, the topic of weaning is extremely interesting and complicated, and a lot of it, a lot of the decisions that are sort of done without thinking are based on faulty theories. And I do think it's evolving, but there's still a lot of people that's one thing about the horse world is it's evolving, but it happens slowly. It's a very tradition-based industry, and one of the reasons we do what we do is to try and get people to question, why do we do these things? Why is it the way we've always done it? Why was I taught this way? And think about maybe if there's better ways to go about it.
Yes, so one other thing, there's the photo here of Ngozi, who was a hyena, and this particular exhibit had a lot of things that I won't go into detail, but it really made every effort to give many sense experiences, including seeing other species and being in water. And water isn't just for drinking. And being able to get one's entire body into water and doing activities around water is something that is also natural for horses. And obviously, hacking out on trail may or may not have access to areas where animals can cross water, but also comes up in training of horses and water obstacles and things like that. So there are ways that we can bring about a real natural understanding and fluidity of behavior for animals around different elements in their environment by creating environmental complexity, which is sometimes easier said than done in a barn environment than in a zoo that has lots of money to spend ensuring that every environment is tailored to the species that is going to be living there. So,
Seeing that model giraffe in the bottom right corner made me think about that. I believe at the University of Edinburgh, they do have a model horse that is adjacent to the isolation area, so that, again, it's mimicking contact, social interaction with other horses.
I've seen that footage. Yeah, and that is another option. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So jumping over to the three F's that Dr. Dyson mentioned, this is a model, a paradigm that people are very familiar with. And Jody, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to you, discussion of looking at these in a little bit more detail.
Okay. So I think that people understand these on a few different levels. We're just talking about socialization opportunities and friends, and I think some of the things I'd like to just point out about that is, first of all, I think that, again, just like with weaning, there are traditional ways of viewing herd dynamics, some of which are very helpful and some of which are based on old research that we may have, changed over the years, or that may have been wrong. Obviously, I think people know that horses are herd animals, and their natural behavior would be to be in groups. But when you see horses in large groups, they also divide off into smaller groups generally. And I think people are familiar with, bachelor bands and concepts like that. But I think when you look at it from the framework of friends, you have to understand that not all horses are going to like each other. And socialization doesn't just mean friends. It also means interactions which may be a little bit stressful. Not all stress is bad. Having opportunities to problem solve, work out their differences and their conflicts with other horses is also natural behavior. So I train out of a small facility that has individual turnouts, but we rotate their neighbors so that they have contact with different horses, and some of them get along better than others. If there's a risk to safety, just either because they don't get along or because they get along a little too well, you have to take precautions for that. But one thing that's been happening lately that's really interesting is we have two horses that have known each other a long time, and they like to mutual groom over the fence. They can reach each other and they mutually groom. And what we've seen is that bit by bit, the other horses have picked up the same habit and have started mutually grooming with other horses. And it's become like a trend that's caught on. And all the horses at the barn now mutually groom with certain horses that they like or feel comfortable with. And it's not, they're not all okay with each other, but they each have sort of a buddy or two that they like to do it with. And I think one aspect of that that's been interesting for me to watch is how they teach each other. If they don't have any interaction with other horses, even visual, there are natural behaviors that they may or may not actually think of doing. And so at the very least, that visual access to each other is important. And if you can allow physical touch, the tactile sense is extremely important to horses, and some more than others, and it's important to know them as individuals. But I think there's that concept of friends is a complex one, not just, you don't just have to have a pasture to throw them all out in together and let them work it out. There are ways that you can maximize their benefit from socialization. I think forage is the one that probably people feel like they have the best grasp on. I've seen a lot of progress over the last decade or so toward using slow feeders and food toys like hay balls, even just hay nets, things that encourage them to spend more time eating, but not just eating. Foraging also involves searching for food. If they did have space, they would be traveling as they ate. And so it's important to not just always have their access to food be in the same spot all the time, and that it not be just super easy to eat. I think people use slow feeders very often to keep the horse's weight down, but it's also a form of problem solving. And like I just said, stress is not always bad. Causing a little bit of stress and having them need to work it out in their brains how to get the food is part of their natural behavior. That's something that they would be doing if they were feral. So it's a topic that I think is not complicated for people, but there's more to it than meets the eye. I think the hardest of the three F's for people to really grasp is freedom. I think it tends to be framed as space and having access to more room to move around, which is very important, and it's definitely an important element of freedom. But there's also psychological freedom, having choices. We tend to simplify their environment and keep it as basic and, again, stress-free as possible, because we don't want them to, they have enough stress in their lives from some of the choices we make. We don't necessarily think to add stress, but there is a form of stress that is healthy, which is that problem solving, working out puzzles, and also having some choice in what happens to them. We all kind of want the same thing, whether we're a human or a horse. We want to be able to make decisions for ourselves. And I think that's a hard concept for some horse people to wrap their heads around, because we don't always trust horses to make good decisions. And it's hard to understand how to create that opportunity for them. But if we think about diversifying their environment to the extent where they can make one choice or the other, it doesn't mean they can make any choice, but they can make one good choice or another good choice, and you give them the opportunity to do one or the other. that feels like freedom to a horse and gives them the psychological space to work things out and feel like they have some autonomy and self-control. Um, that can be done in a small stall. It can be done in a large pasture. It can be done in a training session. There's all kinds of ways that you can incorporate psychological freedom into a horse's routine.
Yeah, I think that behavioral choice, as Jody was sort of spelling out there, it comes as first nature to humans to control all the things. And we can pretty easily just shift our perspective to make an effort and say, what can I do here to give this animal some choices? And again, to vary things up even ever so slightly. If the food is positioned usually in this corner, let's move it to that corner. Maybe we put food in 3 corners and we keep it that way for a week that it's in these 3 corners, and then we move it to another place and giving the animal just choices between which one they want to eat first. We split it up into 3 piles and they get to choose where they want to be, where they want to stand, do they want to move back and forth. And you'll see animals will all make different choices. And so it can be something very easy and subtle to implement as well.
I'll explain this picture because I don't know if it's
Yes.
self-explanatory.
Yes.
That's my dog, which is important. He just happened to like want to be in pictures. But that's a cardboard box that I stuffed full of hay, and I just took an X-Acto knife and I cut some different holes in it. And then what's sitting on top are 2 different spices that I got at the dollar store. And I don't even know, I think one's basil and one's parsley. And so what I'll do sometimes is just it adds a little bit of scent. It may add a little bit of taste, and I will use a different. I'll give. I usually try to give hay with nothing, and then I'll give hay with a scent or a flavor, and give them a choice between one or the other. And I never know if they're going to prefer what's familiar or if they're going to investigate what's different and like it. And different horses have different preferences. You can use the same spice for a whole bunch of different horses, and some will like it and some won't. Some will be more curious and want to investigate it. Some will avoid it. And you can learn a lot about their different psychological makeup by just observing what choices they make in that case. And so this is kind of combining the slow feeder concept with the 5 senses concept and also the choice and control aspect, all in one cardboard box.
And we always say we're not going to talk about all the things, but I'm just going to throw in a thing here that we didn't necessarily plan on talking about, but it kind of goes well here. There's a principle in animal behavior called contra-free loading, and that is that animals will often prefer to perform a task in order to receive a reinforcer, so in this case we'll say food, than to just have it offered freely. And so another choice you can offer animals is, if I put your food in a box like this or in a slow feeder or something, and I also put a couple piles of hay loose, which one do you choose to eat first? Or which way do you go about it? And many will be surprised to find that the animal's like, I kind of like getting it out of the puzzle better than just taking it for free. So it's a fun game to play when you start interacting with your animal this way.
But I think it's quite important also to recognize that that does also have a neurophysiological effect. So problem solving will have an effect on the brain, and it can even change the structure of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But horses, having solved a problem, they effectively, the stimulus they get from that disappears quite quickly. So they need to have more problems to solve. So it's no good just providing one problem. You need to keep providing new problems for them to solve.
That's a great point, because I do see a common practice, which is that people will give their horse a hay ball or a hay toy or even a hay net, and they'll do it once, and it's sort of like the attitude is that it's like a fun thing, and then it's taken away and there's nothing left. Or even more commonly, it's left in the stall and it just becomes a piece of furniture and is no longer challenging because it no longer has any kind of reason to interact with it. So this is, that is an important point that you're making, that this is a systematic process of enrichment, not something that's extra. And the word enrichment makes it sound like it's extra, like it's on top of normal welfare and day-to-day care. But zoos are actually legally required to do it systematically on a regular basis for the exact reason that you just indicated.
And I
Yeah.
think it's also important, for example, with respect to access to forage, that we know about how long feral horses spend foraging and the amount of exercise they take in doing so. So feral horses will walk up to 20 kilometers a day and they will spend up to 14 hours foraging per day. And there are some guidelines that we ought to be able to provide them with opportunities to forage for at least 8 hours a day. And if we don't do that, then and satisfy their behavioural needs, then that is going to predispose to the development of stereotypical behaviours such as box walking, crib biting, wind sucking, whatever. So it's important to try and prevent those unwanted behaviours, which we can do by satisfying their basic needs, but we need to be recognising what those basic needs are. And yes, we're calling them enrichment, but we are satisfying what they actually require.
Yeah, I think people who have horses that have stereotypical behavior or are on stall rest are some of the people that are the most interested in implementing systematic enrichment for exactly that reason.
Yeah. We very often refer to enrichment as being goal-based, which is a whole other topic in and of itself, but it does tend to be individualized. It works best that way and with goals in mind. But the broadest goal is to elicit that normal neurological function, that normal physiological function, by eliciting natural behavior and mimicking that as much as possible. We've talked about this in a previous live, and so Dr. Dyson, if you want to talk about this just a little bit, the relationship between complex environments and footing and muscle development and the benefits of different terrain.
Well, I think we just have to understand the importance of exercise, because horses in their natural environment are going to be moving about a lot, and that has to be good for biomechanical function. And if you think about a human athlete, they spend hours and hours a day training, and training in all sorts of different ways, training to improve their skills, training to improve their musculoskeletal strength and coordination, and also to provide mental stimuli for themselves. So we have to be thinking about doing the same for the horse. And in our conventional way of keeping horses now, so many people are based at barns and they ride in an arena and they don't do a great deal more than that, which is not developing the horse maximally and is not necessarily providing the sound foundation for prolonged soundness. And in order to promote prolonged soundness, we need to be allowing horses to work on a variety of different surfaces. So be it grass or a wood chip track or a sand rubber arena. But they also need to be on variable terrain. So they're not always going on a flat surface, but they're going on an uneven surface, or they're walking up or down a hill or across a hill, because the horse needs to do that in order to facilitate the development of optimal proprioceptive function. And what I mean by that, proprioceptive function is the horse intuitively knowing where it's placing its limbs. So if you walk down the steps of the stairs and you miss the last step, and you suddenly have this awful impact as you miss the last step and you hit the ground surface. because you are attuned to knowing where the next step is, and your body is used to doing that, so you don't need to look at every step. And it's the same for the horse. The horse needs to get in tune so it knows where each of its limbs are, and the normal neuromuscular pathways will act intuitively without the horse having to think. And we're training that by allowing it to go on lots of different surfaces and lots of different terrains. And that we are also working different parts of the musculoskeletal system in different ways. So we're using different muscle groups, we're stretching different ligaments differently, and all of that gets the musculoskeletal system in a state when it is more likely to be able to withstand unusual load. So it's less likely to get damaged from unusual loads. And also by varying the circumstances under which the horse is working, it is less likely to be exposed to repetitive strain type injury, because many of the injuries that we see in horses now, we know are the result of repetitive loading in the same way time and time and time again.
And I think that brings up sort of a thread that is woven throughout all of these topics, which is that depending on where you are geographically, depending on your individual horse, depending on lots of factors, you may or may not be able to provide the perfect scenario for each of these things. Like not everybody has access to hills or to a bunch of varied terrain, but you just like with the limits to social interactions, if you're somewhere where the horses are not turned out together, you can problem solve yourself. It's enriching for humans to figure out ways to go about providing these opportunities or some facet of these opportunities, and like using different groundwork exercises to improve proprioception, creating little areas of different substrates, those kinds of things. You can find ways to do, as it's all about doing the best you can. It's not about letting perfect be the enemy of good and saying, I can't do it, so I'm just going to not try.
Absolutely, but you can just, for example, if you've only got access to an arena, you can put down, say, 10 different poles on the ground in a haphazard way, and just ask the horse to walk through over those poles, without in any way trying to influence the way in which it does so. And it will maybe tread on a pole or roll a pole, but with practice, it will get better and better at negotiating those poles, even if you change the pattern in which they are. And so you can do it by placing poles in a haphazard way to improve its ability to enhance its musculoskeletal coordination. But you can also help the horse physically by placing the poles at regular intervals, and that interval can change so that the horse learns to shorten its step length or increase its step length, doing everything at walk first, and then you can progress to trot and then even perhaps to canter. And then you can make the exercise more difficult by putting the poles as a fan rather than in a straight line. Or you can start raising the poles so that you're asking the horse to work harder. So you can do all sorts of things by using your imagination to make the work potentially more interesting for the horse mentally, and also by enhancing its musculoskeletal strength and coordination.
Yeah, I think that's part of, what we wanted to lean into today with this discussion is that mind-body connection. And that think of, sort of jumping myself back over to the horse's perspective about what they anticipate when their rider comes to visit and what they're going to do today. And having just this array of options that Dr. Dyson, that you just laid out, and then mixed in there is possibly trail ride and possibly a real physical workout with new learning as far as dressage or jumping or whatever the uh, discipline that you're going to work on that day. By broadening that amount of things that the animal has an opportunity to work on, it just starts bringing alive all of these different parts of the body as well as the neurology that supports it, and the horse is kept in such a more natural state of being ready for all kinds of things, and that always is going to come back and benefit you as a rider as well.
And I will just add that it's important to gauge as you're doing that the horse's comfort level too, because some horses really like that variety, and some horses it can be stress inducing to not have as much of a routine. And that doesn't mean that you don't try and expand their routine, but some horses are going to move in that direction more easily and faster than others.
This slide here basically sort of goes over what we were talking about just there with the other one of how you can make complex environments with ridden exercise or even in hand exercises. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to say on that?
No, I would just encourage people to look at the bonus footage, Horses and the Science of Varied Footing, which is on YouTube as well, because then you've got various experts talking and also riders talking. For example, Mary King talking about how she manages her horses and how important she feels that is for their soundness and longevity of their athletic careers. So it's very short, it's very easy to listen to and be inspired by, I hope.
We'll repost those links on our social pages as well, so people can find them easily.
Yeah, we'll have them in the comments here, put them in the socials for sure. And again, that's a follow-up to that Horses and the Science of Harmony film. So Jody, do you want to talk about enrichment and stress reduction as well? Some of the core benefits that we look to with enrichment.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of this towards the beginning, but again, it's a systematic approach, and I think most horse people can understand this framework from the perspective of if you have a horse on stall rest. We look for ways to help them expend their energy and reduce boredom. We don't think as much about increasing their cognitive abilities, but that relates back to what I was just saying, that some horses need help stretching their comfort level with new experiences, novelty, interacting with their environment. And if they're stressed about something else in the environment, sometimes enrichment can serve as a way of sort of distracting or giving them purpose so that they don't hyper focus on the things in the environment that you can't control. Right now we have wild deer at our barn. We have wild turkeys at our barn. The neighbor got chickens and a rooster. These are things that are in the environment that we have no control over. And so we use some forms of training and some forms of play as ways of keeping the horses occupied so that they're not hyper fixated on what the neighbors are doing and what the wild animals in the area are doing all the time. The goal is always to improve relaxation because that is a core pillar of not just the training process, but it's also our obligation, I think, as animal caretakers to provide an environment where horses feel safe and can relax. It's not healthy to be in a state of alert all the time, and horses need to be able to sleep. They need to be able to eat comfortably. And as we talked about before, stereotypies like cribbing, weaving, stall walking, kicking, a lot of stables, it's uncommon to not see at least one horse that's exhibiting these kinds of behaviors. I think we've come a long way in terms of understanding the effects of management. It used to be thought that these were unavoidable behaviors that horses learned from each other, but I think we're starting to understand better that this is an effect of our failure to provide the things I was just talking about, an environment where horses feel safe, where their nervous systems can actually let down. And so it's a critical piece, particularly for horses that already have those, but it also is good for avoiding the development of those and for the reduction in frequency. And even if those emotions are not yet expressing as stereotypical behavior, it's always worth intervening to prevent that in the future.
I think it's very important to stress the availability of a suitable environment for which they can lie down and have rapid eye movement sleep, because that is really their recuperative sleep. And if they are in an environment where the stall is too small, or they've got no bedding, or they are being excessively vigilant because of wild animals in the environment, or if they've got chronic pain and therefore find it difficult to lie down, then all of those are potentially going to limit the amount of rapid eye movement sleep that the horses get. And then they're going to be tired and they can spontaneously collapse as a result of that. So do you get involved in advising people about how to provide the basic environment for rapid eye movement sleep?
Absolutely, and it goes back to, again, if possible, adding choice, because some horses only have one option of where to lay down, and they don't always choose what you think they will. So different substrates, swapping out different beddings is always a good option. I like to do observation. Now we have such great access to cameras that you can see if a horse is laying down and where and how often and for how long. And that can be super valuable information if you're having a behavior problem, if a horse is stressed or exhibiting some unusual new behavior, because that is so important. And, horses are able to sleep standing up, and some people assume that is enough. But a horse that doesn't feel safe, or like you said, a horse that's not comfortable getting up and down, you'll start to see other changes in their behavior develop, and it's always a good idea to figure out whether they are getting enough sleep.
Yeah, very important. Going back again to this idea of the importance of stress reduction that can be accomplished using enrichment and providing an environment that elicits the right kinds of behaviors and provides mental stimulation. I believe this came up in our discussion of ulcers, and we'll link to that discussion in our comments. But Dr. Dyson, I think you said you'd seen something recently, or were looking forward to some new research that might be coming out about ulcers.
Well, there's a lot of ongoing work about what behaviors that a horse exhibits actually are a reflection of gastric ulcers rather than being a reflection of something else. And there are a whole host of things that people assume are related to ulcers, but may not be so. So there has been a study performed in dressage horses, which were undergoing investigation because for ulcers specifically, so they were undergoing gastroscopy. And the owners had to fill in a very extensive questionnaire about what specific behaviors and problems they had encountered with their horse prior to the horse undergoing gastroscopy. Not all the horses did have ulcers, so they compared the frequency of occurrence of those behaviors which occurred in those horses with ulcers with the control group, which did not have ulcers. And they were not able to identify any consistent features which were more likely to be seen in the horses with ulcers versus not having ulcers. Then there is some other work that was published earlier this year from the University of Pennsylvania when they were looking at postures of the horse in the stable using 24-hour CCTV footage and relating it to those horses which had some form of gastric disease versus those that didn't, and standing with the forelimbs very outstretched, and also turning towards the abdomen, as we see here, were two features that were more likely to be seen in those horses with ulcers than those which did not have ulcers. So I think we have historically attributed many behaviours in horses to the fact that this may be related to gastric ulceration, when in fact there's very, very limited evidence to support that. So we have to be very open-minded about and think about what other causes could cause those behaviours which we are attributing to ulcers. And just because behaviour is present in association with ulcers is not necessarily a significant association, and it's certainly not necessarily causal. So we have to tease all this information apart very, very carefully.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. And I think we've seen people be drawn to that concept of a direct correlation. My personal belief is that it is very tempting to want to believe that there's a problem and there's a cure. And because ulcer drugs have become widely available, it's very tempting to associate a behavior with ulcers and treat the ulcers and expect the behavior to change, when it's a much more complex dynamic than that. And like you said, it's really important to keep an open mind and realize that we don't have all the answers, and that we're looking for tools such as the 24 behaviors ridden horse pain ethogram, to identify orthopedic pain, musculoskeletal pain, and eliminate those causes that we do have a little bit easier time correlating with specific behaviors. And then, also think about the other 23 hours a day when these behaviors may be expressing themselves differently than they are under saddle too.
Yeah, and I really think it's important when we're talking about ulcers that we don't forget the basics of friends, freedom, and forage.
Right.
In that we know that a large number of horses with squamous ulcers have them as the result of poor management. And if we improve their management, we give them more freedom, we give them more access to forage, we reduce their starch intake, we are going to improve them, and that improvement can be lasting. So this is just basic correct management. We're talking about it as enrichment in part, but we are actually just fulfilling their basic requirements. And that's hugely important, because I think their basic requirements have historically not always been addressed. And we've all been conditioned to horses living in stables for 23 hours a day and then coming out for maybe 40 minutes of exercise by the time we've brushed them off, tacked them up and put the boots on, etc. Whereas we should be thinking much more holistically about the entire life that these horses are experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a matter of just giving a medication to solve a problem. It's about looking at the whole picture. And that is why we wanted to have this conversation, is that as I said earlier, enrichment is not just something you do that's extra on top of normal care. It's an integral part of the holistic approach to doing the right thing and preventing these problems to begin with. Yeah.
So if we go back to those senses that the horse has, it can smell, it can look, it can listen, it can feel, and it can taste. How do we fulfill its requirements for each of those things? And which does it prefer? Does it prefer food, or does it prefer a withers massage, or is it individual?
It might be very individual. I'll let Megan talk about this, because dealing with zoos where you have entirely different species, there's a lot to be gleaned from being able to observe all those different kinds of animals. But just from the perspective of a horse trainer, I will say there definitely are preferences, but that doesn't mean that you don't address all five. I think it's always important to address all five. I think we food is always a powerful motivator. It's always something that horses engage with, and because of that, it tends to get all of our focus. And so when we think about enrichment, we think about food, toys, hay nets, slow feeders, but there's these other four things that are equally important and maybe take a little bit of thinking outside the box. Our enrichment seminar we call thinking outside the box stall, because it takes some creativity and having an open mind and thinking differently about things, and sometimes doing a little bit of prep work. So, your horse may not initially interact with a novel object that makes noise or smells funny, or that they have to brush up against to feel. But you can actually train them to interact and show them. Just like I was saying that the horses at my barn have learned how to do the mutual grooming from each other, we as humans can teach them how to be a horse a little bit, because some of them have grown up in these unnatural environments. Most of them have grown up in these unnatural environments to some degree, and they need to learn how to use their other senses fully. Megan, do you want to talk a little bit more about variety in individual animals?
Well, yeah, I was noting a couple of things in the conversation there, and yes, we can teach them to interact with the objects as well. But we're tasked with always coming up with new environmental enrichment ideas and concepts, um, toys, objects, sounds, sights, smells, things for the animal to perceive, and um, being sure that we provide it in such a way that the animal has choice in how they want to explore it. And just because an animal stands back and watches the other ones enjoy it, or stands back and goes, "You must be crazy if you think I'm touching that noisy thing," it was still enriching. They still got to make choices. They still got to use their senses in a way that they wouldn't have if you had not provided that enrichment. So it's very reinforcing for the human involved when animals go to town and go crazy and throwing things around and dragging the thing and solving the puzzle or whatever. But if we take the approach again of centering the horse, of what's going to provide some novel stimulation for this horse today that then I can provide again in a week and see how they make progress, or if they choose that they really just don't like this, but providing that. So definitely there's individual variety, but I have three kittens, and I often will purposefully try to do some enrichment when other kittens are sleeping to give some opportunities. But I also recognize that one, my cat's just kind of likes to watch the others more than he engages with stuff, and that's fine too. Another thing I was going to jump off to is sort of on the topic of cats as we were preparing for this and jumping back to this concept here of the effect of stress reduction on disease processes. Another aspect of my life, I have been involved in cat rescue and cat sheltering, and also do cat behavior consulting. And I believe it was Dr. Buffington out of University of Ohio,
Ohio State.
Ohio State, thank you. They, a number of years, did a multifaceted study that uh, used to be called feline urinary syndrome. In humans, it's interstitial cystitis, and now I think they call it idiopathic urinary syndrome. In cats, I've forgotten the name, but basically ruling out infection, ruling out crystals in the urine, ruling out medical causes and or treating all medical causes, and ruling out that there's any lingering effects that cats on a certain frequency will have issues urinating outside the box that appears to be stress related. And that's what Dr. Buffington's studies were revealing. They worked with, if I recall correctly, they were working with colony housed sheltered cats. And so they implemented enrichment protocols, and the feline urinary symptoms would start to go away with the introduction of enrichment, and that the number one predictor that the animal was going to present healthily urinating inside the box was when that animal would finally start engaging in play, which is a natural behavior for adult healthy cats, is that they will play even, not just as young animals, but healthy adults. And so seeing that play pop up, and that was the result of engaging with a more complex environment. And so resolving problems of this sort by way of providing an animal with opportunities to behave naturally is something that I imagine not just it affects ulcers, but perhaps could be related to soundness. With the 24 behaviors, there's an element of listening to the horse is the key crux of that when they exhibit these behaviors, it's for a reason, and providing them other options through how we manage them. But Dr. Dyson, do you see any other correlates between soundness or other disease processes and stress reduction?
Well, I think that our aim must always be to place the horse, if we're going to be training it, in a manner that it's going to be able to learn to its best opportunity. And if the horse is unduly stressed, it's not going to be receptive to learning. So it's really important from a performance and a learning perspective that the horse is not unduly stressed. And there are so many stressors that we potentially put our horses under. I don't think we necessarily recognize that all the time, but that's what we need to be thinking about in terms of the way in which we're managing horses. What are the stressors that we're putting in front of them? And I'm absolutely sure, as Jodie's already mentioned, that we all have to cope with stress to some extent, and that's all part of life, for you, be it a horse or for a human being. But if that stress is excessive, then horses can get to the stage when they just switch off, and they get to this stage of learned helplessness. So we must avoid that, because that's not going to be good for anything in terms of their physical or mental health.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, if they are regularly engaging in stress in low level stressful activities and succeeding at coping, then they get better at it, and they will be able to handle higher degrees of stress when they pop up.
So going back to when we started our conversation, we were talking about the relevance of enrichment and focusing on that relationship between the rider or the human and the horse. And providing enrichment has so many benefits. On a very simplistic view, looking at, generally speaking, animals find this problem solving fun. And again, you need to find the balance for that individual of what might be too difficult for them at their stage of learning. But when you find that sweet spot and they're able to do things for themselves and build confidence, and have stimulating interactions, then they start anticipating possible positive things in association with the human, in addition to anything else that you might provide. And for the human, it also provides you an opportunity to really understand your horse, the animal you're working with, on a very different level, because you're providing them choices and then standing back and watching, what do you choose? You're providing them options and seeing what they think of it. And so that observation really gives you a window into the animal's mind that you might not otherwise have if you hadn't been doing these things. And it really, I feel, in my experience, has just strengthened that bond so much. And Jody, you might want to talk a little bit about this particular character.
Yeah, Ziggy, she was a zebra pony that was rescued by the organization Equitopia. They hired me to work with her for about a year. And she was 18 years old when I met her and had never been handled by humans. And she was severely club-footed and crippled and unable to walk for the most part. But they couldn't catch her to treat her, and so they were planning to euthanize her with a gun from a distance. And if you want to learn more about her, there's a film called "Don't Shoot the Zebra Pony" on YouTube that tells her story. But zebras are a whole other level, and this particular type of zebra is even more of a different level than that. They just are not affiliative with humans, and so it was particularly challenging to get her to establish any kind of relationship with me. And enrichment was really my first step into her world, giving her positive activities to interact with, and then giving her the amount of distance she needed. And I was gradually able to get closer and closer to her as she was interacting with the enrichment. And she started to associate me with bringing her enrichment every day. And it really did physiologically, neurologically change her. Like she definitely came around to having a much more positive association with humans and being much more comfortable with those interactions because enrichment opened that door. I also want to add to this slide. I think people initially are really drawn to enrichment because it is fun and it is relationship building. It is something you can do with your animal separate and apart from riding, which I think most of us get into these activities because we just love horses and we want to be around them. And it is a really pleasant thing to do. But we teach workshops on how to do it. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be super time consuming or difficult. You can make it manageable. However, we are also working on developing a systematic process for like boarding facilities and small barns to be able to implement this regularly, like we've talked about. And that presents a little bit more of a challenge because it has to stay fun for the human. It has to stay doable. And so I think if you're thinking about this for your own animal and you're thinking, this sounds great, I want to do this, keep in mind that it has to be manageable for you. It has to be something that is not going to be overwhelming and too time consuming or too expensive. And there are ways of doing that. And if you want ideas, get in touch with us. But make sure that it's a positive experience for the human as well, because that's going to ensure that it does become a part of not just the extra, but the baseline animal management that you do.
I think I'd just like to add that whenever I listen to any of the really super horsemen from any discipline, they all talk about the need to look at each horse as an individual and unlock the potential for any individual horse. And there isn't a single pathway, and you may need to find various different pathways. But if you find the correct pathway, that horse's life and its performance are going to be massively improved. And what comes across very strongly from these really excellent horse people is that they are intuitively listening and watching their horses and the way in which they're interacting. And I think we can all learn from that in terms of paying more attention to the way in which the horses are interacting with us and their environment.
That's such a good point, and that is really where the connection comes between what we do and what you do, is how important it is to understand the behavior and to pay attention and observe it and track it and compare it and notice changes in behavior, because that is how animals communicate. They're not verbal. They communicate to us through their body language, and the 24 behaviors are what they are because they consistently communicate something that we can interpret reliably into expressions of pain. And I think there are similar parallel behaviors that horses express in their stabled environment that we can interpret as stress, boredom, discomfort, all kinds of those things. But each individual is going to have their language that they use, and it's important to start paying attention before, during, and after you implement any of these processes.
Yes. I I suppose to just wrap up on that thought there with the implementing enrichment and how to go about doing this, and Jody, as you were highlighting, making it doable for yourself. Um, we are in the process of coming up with one of the things that we want to do as the Train with Trust project is present um, these concepts and ideas for people in order to enact them. And one thing that we could benefit from hearing from you all, what type of format would you like to learn more about enrichment if you were going to have some education provided by a nonprofit to you? um, Different people learn different ways. And so we plan on offering multiple things, but we'd really like to know, do people want webinars? Do people want short form videos? Do people want PDFs? What is it that people want more than anything? Do people want Q&A sessions? So if you guys have any ideas about how what would work for you in terms of learning a little bit more about how to do enrichment on a shoestring and with the limited time you have available in your day, because I'm sure you're busy just like we are, um, pop us a message and we'd love to hear from you on that. So I think we're about ready to wrap that topic up, and wanted to go ahead and highlight Dr. Dyson, Horses Inside Out has a new documentary series coming out that you're involved with. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
This is the brainchild of Gillian Higgins, who runs Train with Trust, and Freddie was her event horse. And Freddie got painted multiple times, as we see in this illustration here. Freddie actually came to the end of his life, and his skeleton has been reconstructed. And Gillian invited a group of us individually to talk about the skeleton and what we learned from the skeleton and what we learned about Freddie and his management and how that all translates to potentially enhancing the performance and welfare of horses in the future. So it's a really interesting series of documentaries, at the end of which there'll also be a discussion forum between each of the presenters, at which the participants in the documentary series will be able to ask questions. So I think it's going to be a very good learning series.
That sounds like it will be great. And one great thing is we've been working in partnership to promote all the great work that Horses Inside Out does, and they're very interested in supporting our work as well. We do have a coupon code for followers of 24 Behaviors and of the Train with Trust project. So TWT BBOM for bare bones of the matter. You can use that coupon code, and I forgot to put it up here, but it's 15% off of that documentary series. So it's a great value for all these experts and all of this information that you'll be getting through that series. And 15% off of that is even better. So TWT BBOM will be that coupon code.
And I believe you can buy the episodes individually or as a series too.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And there are trailers available. If you go to the Horses Inside Out's website, there are trailers available for each of the series so that you can learn in advance what may be the content of each individual session.
Great, great. That's really good to know. So our next discussion will be in just about a month, just under a month, on Thursday, August 12th. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone again. And we really appreciate all of you tuning in for our conversations. We're so pleased to be able to get the word out about the 24 behaviors and about other topics related to horse well-being. We're really excited to be engaging on the topic of enrichment today and others to come in the future. So if there are any topics that you all want to hear about, please let us know. Send us a message on our social media, in the comments.